Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Lilas Benson. I am Adela Pineda, the director of Lilas, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Daniel Party, whom I met many years ago, and I am very happy to see him back after so many years here at Lilas, and that we are welcoming him. Thanks also to the sponsorship of the invitation of our faculty. Thanks to, in particularly to Robin and Chelsea, who brought him to our attention, and he has a very interesting research. Our Tinker professors are chosen because of their interdisciplinary interests. We see Latin America through the lens of many disciplines, and we also think that the arts, music, literature, culture is a side of political contestation and interest. And so Daniel's research is precisely there at the intersection of politics, culture, and the arts, particularly in our contemporary society. He's been writing about activist responses through arts to the last movements, particularly in Chile. But she's teaching a course for us here. If you're interested, you can reach out to him and register. I think there are still some spots in his course. And he is going to talk today about this fabulous topic on Víctor Jara, Beyond the Martyr. Un aplauso para Daniel.
Gracias. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to start by thanking Robin and Chelsea, who is traveling right now. She couldn't be here, for thinking of me and inviting me. And then to Paloma and Adela for graciously and kindly welcoming me here. I'm thrilled. I have very high expectations of all that I will accomplish during my semester here at Lilas. During this semester, my plan is to work on my book project, which is tentatively titled Just Like My Talk, Víctor Jara, Beyond the Martyr. And the presentation today will show work in progress towards the book. I have a more advanced portion that is written that relates to what I think will be chapter 1. And if we have time, I want to point out new directions from a different chapter that are brand new and that I'd like to share to get your thoughts. I hope we'll have time. I will begin by giving a very brief introduction to Víctor Jara, for the ones who may not know who he was. Looking around the room, I have the sense that everybody knows who Víctor Jara was. But, okay. Chilean singer-songwriter Víctor Jara is widely known as an international icon of protest song. A leading figure in the Chilean New Song movement that was deeply entwined with the democratically elected socialist presidency of Salvador Allende. Jara sang in favor of leftist revolutions, workers' rights, and against imperialism, capitalism, and social inequality. You will hear him talking, this is an interview he gave in Peru only a few months before the coup, in which he defines himself as a worker of music.
Yo soy un trabajador de la música, no soy un artista. El pueblo y el tiempo dirá si yo sé. Yo en este momento soy un trabajador, y un trabajador que está ubicado con conciencia muy definida, como parte de la clase trabajadora que lucha por construir una vida mejor.
In the days following the 1973 coup, Jara was detained and tortured, shot first in a macabre game of Russian roulette, and later riddled with over 40 bullets. His body was anonymously dumped right outside the gates of the cemetery. While other New Song artists were detained and tortured, and most had to live the dictatorship in exile, Jara was the only one killed. Through this heinous act, Jara became a martyr, the martyr of Chilean New Song. Without a doubt, Jara's international fame was fueled by his untimely death. He was relatively well known outside of Chile before the coup, mostly thanks to his live performances. But soon after it, Jara's fate and songs became the rallying cry of the international solidarity movement against the regime. Fundamental in this process was Jara's widow, the British dancer Joan Turner, also known as Joan Jara. Turner managed to leave Chile for England with her 2 daughters a month following the coup. The judicial case of Jara's torture and death was a painfully protracted ordeal that was unresolved for over 4 decades. It included the exhumation of his body in 2009, a 2016 civil trial in the United States that found a Chilean colonel liable for the assassination of the singer, and a 2018 trial in Chile that resulted in the conviction of 9 other retired members of the military. Jara's martyr status has been of critical consequences to the way in which his life and works have been understood. Certainly, I am not the first to observe this. 3 decades ago, Cambridge University Latin Americanist Robert Pring-Mill warned that anyone interested in learning about Jara should take seriously the distortions his killing inevitably generates. His death set Jara apart and above his peers. This, Pring-Mill suggested, led to both a simplification and ennoblement of his career, and his posthumous role as inspirational figure eclipsed the role he actually played during his life. Pring-Mill's warning, however, has largely been ignored until now. Jara's widow, Joan Turner, has made a similar argument. In an interview with the New York Times, she stated that his image became, quote, that of a poster, a clenched fist, completely politicized. But he was not a symbol, he was a man, and it is important to recover him in all of his dimensions. I could not agree more with Jara's widow, and I think of my book project as a response to her call to recover him in all of his dimensions. As I wish to show, Jara's artistic interests and explorations were much broader than what a political project could prescribe or contain. Broad and heterogeneous, in the way great art always is. Up until now, Jara has been often hailed as a model for political singers, not in small part because his life and art have been found aligned with his political project. My research wishes to show the fissures between Jara and the political project. These tensions between Jara's interests and the party's interests have not been recognized until now. Put differently, I wish to show that Jara was a better artist than a party member, or that throughout his life, Jara was an artist first and a party member second. I am aware that this perspective goes against Jara's own declarations, like the one we listened to just a minute ago. But I understand Jara's statement as part of a negotiation between his artistic motivations and the need to keep the party content. Today, I hope to have time to talk about 2 key moments in his development, one from 1961 and one from 1969. 1961 is the moment where he discovers his voice as a singer-songwriter. And 1969 is a foundational moment for Nueva Canción Chilena, because that's when it gets its name, and that is directly related to Jara's own songwriting. In both cases, I hope to show that there's more to his songs than what previous research has argued. Okay, 1961. In 1961, Víctor Jara received a call that would have a profound impact in his musical career. Cuncumen, the group portrayed here, was a folk music group with which he'd collaborated occasionally. He was not a permanent member of this folk group. They called him to invite him to join them on a tour of the Soviet bloc. At the time, Jara was almost 30. He tried the seminary, military service, and had studied theater acting at the University of Chile. But none of these enterprises seemed to fit him. He had, however, shown great potential for stage directing more than acting, and was, in 1961, enrolled in a 2-year training program for that. In his personal life, he just began dating one of his theater school professors. Times have changed. We hope. And future wife, the British dancer Joan Turner. In her class, he got the best grade. It was the movement class for theater students. Above all, the months-long European tour with Cuncumen was a rare, precious opportunity for someone like him to see Europe for the first time. Jara had grown up poor, with an alcoholic father, absent father, and a mother who died in 1950, when he was only 17 years old. Although he had older siblings, their relationship was strained because Jara's artistic inclinations were difficult to comprehend from their working-class perspective. At university, Jara found kindred spirits in his fellow theater students. But class tensions existed. Most of his classmates came from the middle and upper classes. They enjoyed the financial support of their families, while Jara depended on state aid even to buy food, a fact he tried his best to keep hidden from them. The friends who knew would have him over for meals or invite him on summer vacations. They called him negro, or indio, two terms that, however affectionate, had unmistakable class underpinnings. So this is a picture of the first play he directed in 1959, Parecido a la Felicidad. This is the whole cast, and he's at the center as director. These are pictures of the tour of the Soviet bloc that I mentioned. A picture in Bulgaria, I think, with Cuncumen. This is Margot Loyola. They were touring with Margot Loyola, an important folklorist at the time who worked as a mentor for Cuncumen. And this is Victor performing with a traditional, albeit stylized poncho. The European tour with Cuncumen was exhilarating. In pictures taken on tour, Jara can be seen grinning next to the Eiffel Tower, proudly wearing fancy folk costumes, and merrily dancing on stage. His break happened one evening when one of Cuncumen's soloists was unwell, and Jara had the opportunity to sing a solo number. Members of Cuncumen recall that Alarcón and Jara this is Rolando Alarcón. At the time, he was the artistic director of Cuncumen. And he's somebody I will be talking quite a bit during this presentation, so you can remember his face. Members of Cuncumen recall that Alarcón and Jara had an uncanny ability to meet other men on tour, even without speaking the same language. While there was no doubt among Cuncumen members regarding Alarcón's sexual preference for men, conceptualizing Jara's sexuality required the use of a euphemism. In a private communication, they used the term lunatico, as Jara was lunatico, to describe him. As in English, lunatico derives from the Latin lunaticus, and in this context was used to mean someone who goes through phases. That is, a bisexual. They recall that sometimes Jara would join Alarcón in his escapades. Sometimes he would stay and enjoy the company of Cuncumen's female members. Jara and Alarcón would take off for days of partying between shows, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Once in Yalta, the renowned resort town in Crimea, Jara climbed up a tree to get a glimpse of a sold-out performance by singer Gelena Velikanova. Within the branches, Jara met Vladimir Pjanic and Pyotr Solodovnik, two locals who ended up showing him the town's beaches and cafes. Without a language in common, they communicated with signs. But this was no limitation. Pictures taken at the beach showed them embracing in the surf, smiling like old friends. In all, Jara spent 3 days with Pjanic and Solodovnik. And Pjanic recalls, quote, "Our goodbyes took longer than expected. When we arrived at the dock, the band's other members were already there. It was clear that they were upset with our tardiness." End quote. Later on the tour, after a performance in Leningrad, two audience members were transfixed by Jara and felt the need to meet him backstage. They were two Jewish painters, Solomon Epstein and Alexander Pasternak. Quote, "With painter's eyes, we admired his beautiful head," Epstein recalls. "His short, thick hair of a black to bluish color. He had sad eyes and a dazzling smile in his dark-skinned face. I felt a great desire to paint his portrait." End quote. Epstein and Pasternak approached Jara backstage and convinced him to visit their studio and pose for them. When Kunkumen's translator suggested that he would be unable to join them, Jara smiled and showed his hands. That was all they would need to communicate. Jara visited the studio 3 times. He posed in his Waso costume and his guitar, and each painter painted his own portrait of Jara. In this picture, you can only see one of the painting. It is during this latter part of the tour that Jara, for the first time in his life, felt an urge to compose. He'd written a few songs before, but they were straightforward imitations of folk styles. His ability to emulate was nonetheless compelling. Once, he'd fooled his Kunkumen bandmates and the recording company when he passed one of his own compositions for one collected from a peasant. This time it was different. He needed to express himself through song. What poured out of him was a passionate letter to his then-girlfriend, Joanne. This is a scan of Joanne's book, which was published first in English in London in 1983, which is a biography of Victor. She writes, Victor had composed a very beautiful song, his first to be based upon his own personal experience in life. He had written it for me and was impatient to share it with me. To this day, she considered it one of her favorite songs by Victor. Jara proudly showed it to his bandmates and managed to record an early version while still on tour at the studios of Radio Moscow. Joanne includes the first stanza, translated by her into English. Only the first stanza. This will be important in a couple of slides. I should also point out that her interpretation has been the guiding way of thinking about the song for most of Chilean, and I would say international interpretations of Jara. This is very renowned Chilean ethnomusicologist from the Universidad de Chile, who wrote a fantastic essay on Jara in the mid-90s. And related to this song, he says, motivated by nostalgia, Jara writes Palomita Verte Quiero, his first love song dedicated to his compañera, Joan, unveiling a more personal path in his music and poetry. And here is the Spanish, and this is my translation of the Spanish, which is a little bit different than Joan's translation. Okay, The song opens with a nostalgic and romantic quality. He feels alone. He misses her. He longs to see her. The last verse, "Little dove, I want to see you," works as a refrain, as often happened in folk music, and that is the only line that is repeated throughout the song after the end of each of the 4 stanzas. Okay. The music provides a striking contrast to the melancholy in the lyrics. It is sparse and restrained. The defining musical feature is the reliance on the flattened 7th degree. Traditionally, in a major key, the 7th degree is only a half step away from the scale's fundamental. This minimal distance makes the 7th degree what's called a leading tone, because it pushes up and leads towards a resolution. Flattening the 7th degree increases the separation to a whole step, weakening this traditional pool. Jara announces the importance of this note from the very introduction, played by him on guitar, and that's the transcription that you see on top. We first hear a brief tonic chord, followed immediately by one built on the flat 7th note, the flat 7th chord. This tells us right away that this will be an unusual sounding tune. The second chord destabilizes the harmony. It makes us wonder if the chord we thought was the tonic is really it, if things are really what they appear to be. Jara, aware of the unsettling nature of these chords, repeats the progression right away, confirming this is not a mistake, normalizing its otherness. The use of the flat 7th as melody and as chord comes from a tradition known as canto a lo divino, a folk tradition in which male performers set improvised verses to stock melodies. The vocal melody, and this is the beginning, is also unusual for a love song. It opens with a repeated pitch, this C here. Then it descends briefly, only to return to the original note. This insistent 5th degree makes it sound declamatory, like a religious recitation. This is setting on the 5th degree of the scale. We're in F major. Setting on C is very common in religious music, in medieval chants, also in Quranic recitation. It's a common practice around the world in religious music. The pitch repetitiveness allows one to focus on the words almost by themselves, on what he wants to tell rather than sing. The second phrase also opens with a repeated recitation note, but then goes down a scale a full octave. The third and closing melody is the song's refrain, Palomita, verte quiero. This one too opens with a repeated 5th degree, albeit at the lower octave. But it counteracts the previous descent by moving up from the 5th degree to the flattened 7th to the fundamental. Music theorist Walter Everett calls this brief melody the blues trichord, and it is most famous use in rock music is the opening riff of Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water. Pam, 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 Palomita, verte quiero. Okay. I should say that the Deep Purple song is later. Reaching the scale's 1st degree gives us a sense of arrival, but it's only partial. The flattened 7th weakens it. I want to see you sounds more like a question than a declaration of longing. So here you have the full lyrics, the remaining 3 stanzas. The remaining 3 verses are set to the same music, but the words take a much darker and existential route. In one, Jara tries in vain to hold back tears, but memories overtake him. In another, he is troubled by the pressure of heteronormative masculinity. A man may only be a man if he's as strong as a rock, if he walks straight as a tree trunk. Perhaps most unsettling is the last one. He tells of a black stain on his soul and his need to remove it. Jara uses the plural to identify the ones responsible for this black mark. Lo que me dejaron negro, lo que me dejaron ellos negro. It's more than one person. I'd like to play for you the song so you can hear it in his own voice, both the music and the words.
Paloma, quiero contarte que estoy solo, que te quiero. Paloma, quiero contarte que estoy solo, que te quiero. Que la vida se me acaba porque te tengo tan lejos. Palomita, verte quiero. Lloro por cada recuerdo a pesar que me contengo. Lloro por cada recuerdo a pesar que me contengo. Lloro con rabia pa' afuera, pero muy hondo pa' dentro. Palomita, verte quiero. Como tronco de nogal, como la piedra del cerro. Como tronco de nogal, como la piedra del cerro. El hombre puede ser hombre cuando camina derecho. Palomita, verte quiero. ¿Cómo quitarme del alma lo que me dejaron negro? ¿Cómo quitarme del alma lo que me dejaron negro? Siempre estar vuelto hacia afuera para cuidarse por dentro. Palomita, verte quiero.
Central to Paloma Quiero Contarte, or Palomita Verte Quiero, that song is known by those two names, is a preoccupation with not letting others see one's true colors. This concern expressed in it's the only idea that is expressed in two different stanzas. The way he feels inside is not what he can show others. And the reason is clear. He has to pretend in front of others to protect his inside. More than anything, Palomita Verte Quiero registers as a confession, one far darker than a simple declaration of love. But what exactly is he confessing to? The song's opening declaration to his beloved is that he is alone, not lonely, as Joan translates that phrase. He feels compelled to announce that he is not with someone else, perhaps a confession of an infidelity. The need to hide what one really is, combined with his concern of what a man or what a real man is, suggests that perhaps what is at stake is a conflict with his own sexuality. This conflict may have been heightened by his experiences during the tour of the Soviet bloc. In letters he wrote to John, he talks about discovering a political calling. Such an awakening is likely to have been accompanied with the difficulty of conceiving an identity as a queer revolutionary. Certainly, this is not the only possible reading of this song. It is conceivable that the stain may refer to the mark of growing up poor. This connection is not suggested in the lyrics of this song, but may be inferred intertextually. In a different song from later in the 60s, but that appears on his first album from 1966, he talks about poverty as a black sea that needs to be cleared. So the black, it's not a stain, but it's a black sea. Un mar amargo y negro que se tiene que aclarar, is how he refers to poverty then. In any case, the longing of the refrain seems to be less about seeing his beloved than a desire for her to redeem him of his own past. To me, the song makes most sense as a declaration by Jara in which he wishes to change, to be different, and that Joan, the Palomita, is the key to his transformation, this redemption, as a desire to fit a heteronormative imperative. And that's what he tried to accomplish upon his return to Chile. Soon after, he married Joan, and together they had a daughter, Amanda. Along with this, he began his official participation in the Chilean Communist Party, a militancy he maintained until his assassination in 1973. At a time of heightened homophobia, particularly among Chilean leftists influenced by the Cuban Revolution, a queer revolutionary was a conceptual impossibility. In what Nadine Hobbs has called the circular logic of the closet, Jara's engagement in a markedly macho project contributed to the deniability of the rumors. I have no reason to believe that Victor and Joan's relationship was only a screen, needed for militancy in the Communist Party. In her biography of the singer, Joan narrates many sweet and tender moments they shared. However, it is indisputable that marriage and fatherhood helped at a time when homophobia across the left and right was rampant. As a counterexample, I'd like to mention something related to Rolando Alarcón, the other singer that I pointed in the picture. Rolando Alarcón, Jara's Cuncumen colleague, applied to become a member of the Chilean Communist Party, but he was rejected because he did not hide his homosexuality. Throughout the 1960s, and here the point I want to make is that there's a considerable change that happens between the 60s and the 70s. Okay. Throughout the 60s, Jara remained active in the theater scene, developing a renowned career as a stage director. He toured internationally, and his plays won several Best of the Year awards. The theater scene was a queer-friendly space, and it served as a safe space for a large group of Chilean artists, many of them musicians. In 1968, Jara was in London in a residency at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And after he returned from that, he staged a successful run of this British play, Entertaining Mr. Sloane. This is the booklet for its Spanish translation, Entretengamos a Mr. Sloane, a play by queer British author Joe Orton. This play features a gay character and features the first on-stage kiss by two men in Chilean theater. And actors still today recall, actors who participated recall the importance for Jara, that kiss was the climax of the play. Starting in the mid-1960s, Jara began performing and recording music regularly. And the music world was less welcoming to sexual diversity. As a defense mechanism, Jara was more guarded among his fellow musicians. In the 5 decades since his death, these musicians have been interviewed countless times, asked over and over the same questions about their lost compañero. Although their recollections are largely hagiographic, one gets a persistent sense that something is not being said, or said without saying it. These are quotes by two members of Inti Illimani, a band he collaborated with. So Coulon says, Jara was at times complicated. He had a secret side. And Salinas says, he was rather mysterious, reserved, a man of few words, not talkative, but very intense. My sense is that this is not correct. It's rather, this is the side that he showed, Jara chose what to show to who. Quilapayún deserves a special mention because Quilapayún was a band, more so than Inti Illimani, very committed to a strong masculine ethos. Quilapayún means three beards. And they speak very openly about wanting a name that represented a very strong masculine stance. Okay? So Patricio Castillo, a guitarist at Quilapayún, said Victor was a fairly impenetrable man. And Eduardo Carrasco, one of the leaders of Quilapayún, he opened up to very few people and always seemed to keep aside of him to himself. While in many of his songs he talks about his life, he always does so with a secret discretion, like saving a territory for himself. Quilapayún, they loved to make jokes, and quite aggressive jokes, many of them homophobic and misogynist. And the same guitarist Patricio Castillo says, the truth is that Quilapayún in early years, which is the years when they collaborated with Víctor Jara, they were always shitting themselves in laughter. Or we were shitting ourselves in laughter, permanently. And we always laughed about Victor in his face. I think that this is my interpretation, but so I don't have evidence for this. There's no documentation, but that this may be related to why Victor stopped collaborating with Quilapayún and shifted to Inti Illimani, starting in 1970. The members of Inti Illimani were younger and less homophobic. The quotes suggest that they weren't quite sure what Victor was up to, but there's a more generous approach towards Victor. The one artist who is more open about his own homophobia is another member of Nueva Canción Chilena, Patricio Mans. Patricio Mans was part of the Peña de los Parra, one of the founding members of Peña de los Parra. And in 1996, this is a quote of him, he said, the interviewer asks him, what was your relationship like with Víctor Jara and Rolando Alarcón? And he says, right there, things get tricky. My relationship with Alarcón and Jara was complicated. I was born in Nacimiento, which is a very small town in the south of Chile. I was prudish. I was a provincial boy who didn't know the world, who had never been abroad. So, to come to terms with the homosexuality of two people who, even though it was in jest, would grope you, it was difficult for me. Okay, now I would like to shift to the 1970s. So this was the 60s. For Jara, pressure to conform to a heteronormative imperative got considerably stronger after 1970. Jara participated in the successful presidential campaign of Salvador Allende. And after Allende was elected, Jara became a sort of cultural ambassador for Allende's leftist coalition. Almost overnight, Jara went from being a protest singer to a singer of the state. That in itself is a fascinating transition that doesn't happen very often, and I think it's one of the reasons why we are so drawn to this historical case. On August 7, 1971, the conservative anti-government newspaper La Tribuna ran a front-page article that stated that Víctor Jara and Rolando Alarcón two of the Communist Party's best-known artists, had been caught by police in an extrañísima refalosa. Refalosa is a Chilean folk dance. A most strange folk dance, or a queer folk dance. They had been caught by police, quote, participating in a wild party with minors, unquote. The satirical and mocking piece makes a plethora of gay puns with song lyrics by both artists, and concludes stating that the detention had resulted in the expulsion of both artists from the ranks of the Chilean Communist Party. Okay. As the La Tribuna news spread, even internationally, Jara felt compelled to respond publicly. The response, published 3 days later in a pro-government newspaper, included a letter penned by Jara and an official statement by the party. In his letter, Jara dismisses the accusations as ofensas gratuitas, unwarranted insults, and as attacks on the Communist Party that rely on, quote, discrediting the reputation of one of its folk singers. Notably, neither Jara nor the party chose to defend Rolando Alarcón. Most likely, this is because Alarcón's homosexuality was more difficult to keep under wraps. Alarcón was an effeminate gay man who lived his sexuality as openly as was possible in early 1970s Chilean society. He was active in Santiago's gay circuit of bars, clubs, and Turkish baths, and at the time of the exposé, he was in a long-term relationship with the folk dancer José Luis Hernández. Given the homophobic context, it is understandable that Jara felt compelled to deny accusations of homosexuality in 1971. The context was such that public recognition of homosexuality would have resulted in the end of his engagement with the Popular Unity government. It would have ruined his musical career as well. As Joan Turner acutely observes in her book, in the early 70s, to suggest someone was homosexual was, quote, an accusation which in a thoroughly machista society was understood by everyone as the worst possible insult, end quote. This 1971 exposé illustrates a key aspect for my research, that the relationship between Jara and the Communist Party was more complex and fragile than is often recognized. In public statements, the Communist Party always presented him as a model compañero, and in many ways, still to this day does. Internally, however, the situation was more complicated. Off the record, several informants have mentioned to me that the party's central committee was well aware that Jara was not heterosexual, and that there was a permanent fear that his sexuality would be discovered. One informant, again speaking of the record, says that Jara even attended conversion therapy in response to the party's pressure. The intensified scrutiny over his sexuality had an impact in his creative endeavors. For one, Jara gave up his successful career in theater as soon as he endorsed Allende's candidacy. Theater's reputation as a queer space was too risky to sustain. In his songwriting, Jara became increasingly guarded towards the end of the 60s and into the 1970s. He composed a surprisingly small number of love songs. And I think, if you know, for example, somebody like Pablo Milanés or Silvio Rodriguez, they have a much larger proportion of love songs. They mix politics and love, but love is present in ways that, if you look at Jara in his life, short life, wrote about 80 songs. There's very, very few love songs. And the ones that are love songs, if you go back to them, they're fairly oblique and ambiguous. Ambiguous in terms of not committing, not ambiguous in terms of that you can easily provide a queer reading. The accepted narrative is that Jara gave up the personal as a self-sacrifice for socialist ideals. I do not disagree with that narrative, but I believe it is intertwined with a fear of being discovered. It was safer not to address the topic. The openness with which he expressed himself in 1961's Palomita Ver Te Quiero never returned. We don't have any other song like the one I played for you later in his career. Okay, so that's my first part. Very briefly, I want to share the new stuff that I'm doing. and it relates this song from 1969, Plegaria a un labrador. This is a song that he wrote for a contest. It was the first contest of Chilean New Song. And it's the name of the movement comes from this contest. And Victor ended up winning the contest with this song. And he basically became famous overnight with this festival. A sign of his popularity is that Mercedes Sosa, the great Mercedes Sosa, recorded this song while Victor was alive. You couldn't get more popular than that in this movement. I should say it's the only song that Sosa recorded by Victor while he was alive. And when Victor toured Mexico, Peru, Costa Rica, he always told this story. So it was a big deal. Okay? Here's a picture of the award ceremony when he won. Victor is at the center, and Quilapayún, all in black ponchos, were accompanying him vocally. Primer Festival de la Nueva Canción Chilena. Okay, this is also the song that is most written about regarding Víctor Jara. It's taught regularly in world music classes. It's a paradigmatic song of the movement. And the way people write about this song is that it's a very neat hybrid between the Lord's Prayer, reference to the Lord's Prayer that could connect to Victor's own experience in the seminary and with a Catholic upbringing, with a socially committed perspective, celebrating now not the Lord, but the peasant. The song has two parts. One that is darker and more mournful in E minor, and then a more ebullient one in E major. This is a fairly common standard interpretation of this song. Jara took the traditional folk songs of the countryside and combined them with modern lyrics. The result was a musical hybrid of the past with the present. The point I'd like to make, and that I want to make in this different chapter, is to show the extent to which Jara was being influenced by contemporary popular music. Not only events, not only the lyrics, but there's musical elements that are quite contemporary, and those haven't been acknowledged. And my argument is that this would also go against the teachings or the directions of the party. This is a video of Jara performing it in Cuba in 1972. You'll hear the first part in minor, and then sort of the happier part in major. Pay special attention to the part in major. That's the one that I want to analyze musically afterwards. It's a very short clip. It's a minute and a half.
Levántate y mírate las manos para crecer, estréchala a tu hermano. Juntos iremos unidos en la sangre. Hoy es el tiempo que puede ser mañana. Líbranos de aquel que nos domina en la miseria. Danos tu reino de justicia e igualdad. Sopla como el viento la flor de la quebrada, limpia como el fuego el cañón de mi fusil. Hágase por fin.
Okay. Sorry. So it's the chorus that I want to focus on now. The chorus has two parts, each one repeated. It's 4 lines, so the same music, 2 lines, 2 lines. These are the chords. They're all major chords. A major, and then E, D, E, D, that is repeated, and then G, D, A, E, G, D, A, E. It's not a very common link of chords if you play guitar, all major chords. And if you use Roman numeral analysis, we have, again, that flattened 7th degree that I mentioned, and also a flattened 3rd. Okay, where do these chords come from? And here, I have to say, I didn't discover, part of this I didn't discover myself. I relied on Patricio Castillo, the guitarist who collaborated with him. And he says, Victor came one morning to show me the song he had prepared for the 1969 contest. He had part A, the song's slow part, but it needed a B section, which we created then. When B starts, I put some chords there that weren't mine. They were influenced by an album I had by Led Zeppelin. Okay? I should say Castillo was about 15 years younger than Jara. So he fits perfectly as a Led Zeppelin fan. The first Zeppelin album had just come out. And I think, so Castillo proposes it to Jara. And Jara loves it. Castillo says that Victor laughed and loved this idea. And this is part of also what I want to show in the book, is that Jara is not only this. This is him in Shakespeare's celebration of his birthday in 1968, full summer of love, dressed very differently. Jara was incredibly stylish. All his theater friends say that. The music friends are shy about that, but the theater friends are very open about how he loved clothes, he loved dancing. He loved the Beatles, he loved Bob Dylan. Okay, and I think the song that Castillo is referring to is Communication Breakdown. The opening song, Good Times, Bad Times, has similar chords, but this one is, how they're put together is more explicit. So it's also in E major. Led Zeppelin is E, D, A, D. Bam, 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 bam. I'll play it so you can hear it. Victor's, it's the same set of chords. There's not a common set of chords, organized in a different order. But and even though in Victor, it's a solo guitar being strummed, it has a rock. If you pay attention to it, it has a rock energy that relates to its harmony. That wasn't here.
Líbranos de aquel que nos domina en la miseria. Tráenos tu reino de justicia e igualdad.
Okay, that's the first half of the chorus. The second half,
Is there a 7 in that first chord though?
it major 7.
Okay. Yeah.
This progression was actually quite common in progressive rock in the late 60s. You can hear it in Jimi Hendrix's Hey Joe, in A Day in the Life, and later in Here Comes the Sun. And the sun, 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 here we come. And in the Rolling Stones' Jumping Jack Flash. I don't know which of this is where Victor got this idea. In terms of dates, well, it could be, we know that he was a big Beatles fan, and he certainly had Sgt. Pepper at home. But he was also in London at the time when this song was very popular. It was a single, and a very successful single by the Rolling Stones. I'd like to play for you the chorus of Jumping Jack Flash, so you can hear it's the same 4 chords.
Sopla como el viento la flor de la quebrada, limpia como el fuego el cañón de mi fusil.
Nice mashup.
That wasn't intentional. Okay. So what I wish to show with this example is that the presence of rock was not a one thing that came later. Often people talk about El Derecho a Vivir en Paz in 1971 as a very innovative thing. I think if one listens closely to the music from the very beginning, American, British influences were already there. And that complicates the idea that Nueva Canción was an anti-imperialist, only focused on the local, and that these artists, that's what they were up to. I think Victor was, up until his killing, exploring new things, taking things from sources that were not kosher for the party, but managed to create these hybrids that I think are way more interesting than the picture that is often told about him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I think we still have some minutes for questions. I would like to, I think he makes us think many different things. I thought of like earlier communist revolutionaries, not in music but in film, like Sergei Eisenstein and homosexuality, right? His big trip to Mexico was actually a discovery of his queer identity. But I also think that the connection between the leftist movement of the 60s and 70s and the counterculture have more connections than we think they have. And there are so many examples of revolutionaries who were also engaged with countercultural movements. And I think there is this historian, Eric Solok, who has written for Mexico about the connections between counterculture and socialism or communism. So I think your research on Jara is like gearing towards this broader topic, how the philosophers of counterculture in a way were there at the same time when, the hopes for revolutionary change in the world was there too. So that's what I thought, but I don't know if anybody has questions.
Hi, fascinating analysis, really enjoyed it. One of the things that I've always wondered is, David Spooner at Trinity University in San Antonio, and I've written a little bit about Víctor Jara and
more than
some of these things. And never really wanted to, as an outsider, really talk about this set of themes because I felt like it wasn't really my place to do it. But one of the things I've always been confused about or questioned is the contemporary Chilean Communist Party is not like the old one, right? I mean, we've had Pedro Lemebel, broken a lot of new ground. It's a lot of the old taboos are not there anymore, and I'm just sort of, and there's an open and large gay movement, LGBTQ movement in Chile, and I was always kind of scratching my head, like, why doesn't anybody talk about Victor in this way? And I guess the other thing is, does Joan have anything to say about these things? Is she still around and still talks to people a lot? And has she ever commented?
Okay, I'll start with the second part. Joan has been asked about this, but at least publicly, she's always said she doesn't want to talk about it. And if you approach the archive, the Víctor Jara archive, they always ask you, what is your project? And people before me have said, I'm interested in exploring this topic, and the archive has been immediately closed. And related to the first one, it is true, and I think considering the times today, there's been a lot of progress in terms of queer rights in Chile. I think it's ripe for a resignification of Victor as a queer revolutionary from a different perspective, as somebody in the counterculture who argued for opening in different ways, and not only political, party politics, I mean. But it hasn't happened. My guess is that it's related to the difficulty in bringing to justice the perpetrators of his killing. In the sense that all his collaborators wanted to support Joan and that trial, and they didn't want to interfere with that investigation. And one thing that makes me think that is that maybe 10, 12 years ago, on a late night TV show, they had a panel in which they had members of the Communist and the Socialist Party and members of Pinochet's family, like a grandson or a great nephew. And this guy who I never met before, I didn't know of before, he started talking about Víctor Jara's killing. And this Pinochet descendant described Jara's killing as a crime of passion. And he used that term to clear the dictator from responsibility. So this, he didn't explore further what he meant by a crime of passion, but I feel that that line of inquiry could have weakened a very protracted trial, and that's why people haven't. I've been working on this for a long time, quietly. I've been more, I feel more comfortable writing a book now and speaking about it more openly, now that the perpetrators have been brought to justice. I feel like that chapter, at least partially, can be closed. And also, my sense is that once Joan passes away, a lot more stories will come out that so far haven't.